Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Detective Pikachu. Detective Pikachu is two of Hollywood's favorite things. It's a licensed property, and it is a high-concept movie, but also is based on a property within that licensed property. So it's like all the things they love. And in a lot of ways, it is the kind of perfect Hollywood summer movie. And it feels that way. It's directed by a kind of serviceable director. It's done in the decent Hollywood style. And that's kind of a revelation because in terms of video game movies, you don't get something this competent. Is it an amazing movie, especially if you don't know what a Pokemon is or anything? It's sort of just okay, and it never really gets much beyond that. But I understand why everyone would be freaking out about it, because it's competent enough. I mean, I feel like someone could definitely come in and make a better Pokemon movie, and I'm, as an audience member, already open to that. This is a film that could be a lot weirder and more fun and stranger and play more with the detective angle, which it only really uses as more of a style thing in terms of just like the cinematography and things, than actually going into much of a mystery. It does a mystery like, big blockbusters do mysteries, not like how an actual detective thing does a mystery, despite it being called Detective Pikachu. Now, whether or not this is a great adaptation of the Detective Pikachu game, as its kind of big Hollywoodness, it is kind of a step in the actual right direction for video game movies, one that we haven't seen. Every summer we're like, well, maybe, Rampage, it'll work out, or Ratchet and Clank, or World of Warcraft, or Angry Birds, that worked. And in terms of a live action video game movie, this is probably one of the biggest steps in the right direction that I've seen, maybe since this unformed genre of adaptation has really been. I think it took a while for superhero movies to become, even though they're very profitable, to sort of figure themselves out as a genre. And video game movies aren't really there yet. I would say we're still in the X-Men phase of things, whereas this is half like, well, we're not going to get too much into the anime show and Ash and Brock and Misty and all that stuff. And that's what a lot of people I hear that complaints about this movie. Why isn't it that? But that's kind of a dumb complaint because, well, it's actually adapting a different Pokemon thing, not that thing. But I think the idea that this is the first movie adds some credence to that complaint, because most people, when they think of you're making the movie of the licensed property, it's got to be all the biggest things first. And starting with the Detective Pikachu movie is kind of a weird choice, but it seems like that was the only way they could get a Pokemon movie made, or they felt this was the best concept, really. Although maybe, the first couple episodes of the TV show was probably a good enough of a concept, but whatever. So I understand that, but I think that's kind of like a complaint that's like, I get, because it does feel like we're in that age of, with this, the age of superhero movies where you had the first X-Men and they're wearing the black leather because they're too embarrassed to be the real X-Men and have the suits and stuff. And then the MCU and Marvel happened, and suddenly you can have all this colorful things and you don't need to be embarrassed. I don't think video game movies are at that point, because they kind of want to be this adaptation first. We're going into this as a movie, we have to make certain sacrifices and things like that, and not going into its free willingness. This kind of feels that way, especially because you have this whole city of Pokemon, and it feels like in some shots you have a lot of fun with that, and I feel like those shots are what audiences are really latching onto. It was cool seeing Snorlax asleep in the middle of the street. It was cool seeing that one Pokemon who served coffee, whose name I don't even know. I actually thought that was a lot of fun, but it doesn't have too much fun with it. That's kind of the thing with the movie, is they could have gone more into the fun concept of it. You have a city full of cool, crazy animated characters who everyone loves, and we're spending all this time on Justice Smith trying to figure out this thing about his dad. And you might say, hey Jim, but that's the character that's trying to lead us through this movie. I mean, sure, but it's also a Pokemon movie. I want to see some fucking Pokemon. That's how this whole thing works. That is kind of the main point against it. However, I mean, this director, Rob Letterman, who also directed Shark Tale, which for some reason they're not putting that on the poster, and Monsters vs. Aliens, and recently Goosebumps and Gulliver's Travels with Jack Black. So he's a spotless filmography, clearly. This is definitely his best made movie. Absolutely. Especially in terms of live action. Maybe you want to fight with me over Monsters vs. Aliens in the comments. I really don't care about any of those movies. I'm sorry. They're none of them. It's clearly he's going through the 90s and picking up nostalgic properties recently. But this is far better made than the Goosebumps film. In the Goosebumps film and this, it feels like he hints at the lore and the history of these properties. It never feels like he really loves these things. It feels like he gets that this is a big job, and he does a competent enough job that no one's going to say this guy like totally blew it. He didn't Schumacher this up. He never really gets into it where it feels like he really like had a real understanding of these characters. You know, he didn't like go into this and go, you know, it would be the greatest thing for Pokemon and this property. It's just like he was like, this is the Detective Pikachu movie. I was hired to make this, and he does a decent job. And I don't really have a problem with that per se. It doesn't feel as adventurous. He's not the kind of director you're going to really think about much more than go like, I mean, I'm sure it will be fine. And that's what this really was. He often relies on lead performances, particularly in his live action films, whether that be with Jack Black in Gulliver's Travels or Jack Black again in Goosebumps. I think this is more comparable to Goosebumps in that he has like a younger cast and then kind of a very well trained, very charismatic actor. And in this he has Ryan Reynolds versus Justice Smith, and Ryan Reynolds really carries this film. It does feel like he's dead Pikachu or whatever. He's just doing his sort of Deadpool Ryan Reynolds thing. I'm not like the biggest Ryan Reynolds fan. I know like a lot of people are for whatever reason. That's neat. But it felt like another starring vehicle for him. It felt fine. You know, it was like kind of like a toned down Deadpool kind of thing. It wasn't a particularly amazing performance. Any of the twists in it or something were kind of just lame kind of Hollywood things and felt like kind of inventions screenwriters think about. And real people go like, I don't really think about that. Why didn't you come up with something that was more sort of interesting or more used to the Pokemon thing? I mean, this is also like, I think one of the problems with this film is it's like a Pokemon movie without that many Poke battles. You only see one Pokemon go into a Pokeball. Although maybe Detective Pikachu, the game, doesn't do that. It does feel a little like, so this is the Pokemon movie? Detective Pikachu is a fun, great ride. And if you like Pokemon and you grew up with it and you know the various generations and games and seasons of the show, I'm sure you'll have a fun time. You know, if this is like the default best video game movie, I think that's like better, but it's not better to the point where it's like a triumph. Like, hey, we made a really great movie that was adapted from a video game. Instead, we're still in the phase of this is a really good video game movie. And when we're saying that with the connotation that, but that sort of means, you know, out of all the ones that are like horrible garbage movies. And like this is like maybe the decent horrible garbage movie. And that's cool. And I think that seems to be the thing with Detective Pikachu. You rose above to this, which is just like kind of a summer blockbuster thing. I just wish we had a director who would get into the weirdness, the fun, the strangeness of Pokemon. I do kind of want that adaptation of the original show, which I'm sure they will do at some point. And, you know, it seems like Hollywood doesn't fully want to embrace this, even though it feels like audiences really, really have a lot of interest in it. But no one's been able to kind of crack the code. And it feels like maybe this hasn't cracked it, but it, you know, got a lot closer than anyone else has. I think that's because, if anything, you know, having a competent director like Rob Letterman, he's competent in that he knows how to get the job done. And he did that. You know, he showed enough Pokemon where you're talking about like, oh, did you see this? Did you see that? You don't feel cheated, but you don't feel fully fulfilled by it. It's like getting like a meal from a chef who's just sort of like knows what they're doing, but you're probably, you know, might not go back if, you know, your real favorite restaurant isn't busy that night. He's fine. You're satisfied. You went home. Everything's good, but it's not a fantastic, amazing day. It was just serviceable. He's competent, he's serviceable, and he's very good at doing that, but he's not much else. I don't think this is a very good mystery. It's like a thing that's influenced by Blade Runner and neo-noir, which was just ripping off actual noir, so it's sort of like someone going like, hey, you know that thing, and then there was that thing that referenced that thing, and we're referencing the second thing, but we're like the third thing down, and you're just sitting there like, what? Can I just watch Detour, man? Like, what is this? I feel like the kind of weird noir place we're in where people are like, it's like a noir. I'm like, do you know what that is though? And I don't think Detective Pikachu does know, but the cinematographer definitely does know. And I will say, you know, obviously this became more of a thing because of the Sonic trailer and it being shot on film. It does have a nicer feel to it, I will actually say, and a more tactile feel to it than I think being shot digitally. And I think that actually did for real work for it. But I also think it understood exactly what it is trying to do, and that seems to be something that, you know, when you have a publisher who makes the game, who has a lot of stake in a movie doing well, and you have a movie studio and there's usually a lot of clashes, and you turn out with something that doesn't fully work. This felt like movie people trying to make the compromises, trying to make all that work to make a decent enough film, and that's what they did. If you're unfamiliar with Pokemon in general, I don't know why you're seeing this, and that's weird, but I think this is a good middle ground where you'll have a good enough time enjoying the AC during the summer movie and be fine with it and have your big explosions and certain celebrities and parts and all that stuff, and you're cool with it. In terms of like an astounding movie, it's sort of just more like, hey, this genre and this form of adaptation has mostly been bad things, and this is sort of like fine, and that's kind of surprising in that fact. But eventually, when we do have a lot of good video game movies, and there's a ton of them, we're not going to look on this totally fondly. You know, we'll look back on Pokemon the first movie and those movies, sure, but this will just be kind of like a transition thing. It's something we need right now. It is a step in the right direction, but I think, you know, in 10, 15 years, hopefully, when this thing finally settles itself out, because it frankly, you know, I'm not the biggest video game fan or gamer person or whatever. I didn't even know who Pro Jared was 3 years ago and now, but I'm not one of those people really, but I think this is something we should have solved by now, and this feels like something that will at least push them to go, hey, this made money, maybe we should hire people who like will actually like sink their teeth into this world. And I think Rob Letterman he was very respectful, but he clearly doesn't love it as much. He's just very good at melding these things and being a competent, good, serviceable studio director, and as fun and as interesting as that isn't. Detective Pikachu is kind of a wonderfully okay film. I had a good enough time, but I think I still have better memories of Pokemon the first movie than I do of actually like watching this. I mean, the other thing is, I think the reason this could be a more successful film is because part of the success of Pokemon wasn't just the game, it was the cards, it was the TV show, it was all those things, and most video games don't have all that. You're just adapting from the video game, so it's a bit of a different thing, but at the same time, in what it achieves is a triumphant thing for video games, but in terms of movies, it's just kind of like, sure. But that sure is still a triumph at this time, but I think it's a triumph at this time that has an expiration date that I think we're all hoping will come soon. But while we're waiting, at least we can have a fun time with Detective Pikachu. So if you have seen Detective Pikachu and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.